Hi class, so welcome to Enhancement Theory 01. In this case, I have more images to show us, but always know and remember that I only expect you to turn in 3 images, okay? So I have a couple of images here, and some of these are okay, some of these are a little bit problematic than others, but we're going to kind of tackle on these files and see what we can do. So first of all, if we're in the library module, pay attention to the module you are in the top here. I'm going to highlight this image. This is going to be the first image I'm going to work on. So I'm going to just go click on develop right here. Once I click on develop, I'm going to change the module over to the develop module. I'm going to jump into full screen mode here. It makes it easier. So this image right here that I have is photographed, well, pretty well. If we take a look at our histogram here on top, the files are, it was captured rather well, but it kind of looks flat, dull, and a little bit boring at times right now. The white balance of this file seems okay, so we're going to kind of just jump in the basic panel here and look at the adjustment. So the way how we're going to adjust our files, we're going to start out with the white balance. If the white balance of the file seem okay, just go ahead and leave that alone for the time being. You can always come in and fine tune it later. But I found out that if you get it right, it's just best to leave it like that, just because we have a tendency to come in and really changing the way how our file looks and feel. And sometimes we do it rather too much and it looks like a badly exposed image. Okay, so just kind of not do that for the time being. And notice what I just did there is I messed this up really badly like so. But what you can always come do is highlight on the name and just double click on it and it'll reset it to the default value or what it was photographed at. So we were adjusting our images using a Lightroom 3 before. We're going to notice that our dials are kind of the old way of doing it. That means things are set in a really weird manner. For example, black already comes into 5. There's brightness and exposure, and brightness is always set at 50, as you can kind of see here. The contrast is always set at 25, so it's kind of rather confusing in Lightroom 3. And with Lightroom 4, Adobe has released a new engine to process our file, and in order for us to access that amazing capability, we have to look at our image in the development module. First of all, we need to be in the development module, and if you look in the bottom right hand side of the loop view right here, which is the one image up, you're going to see that there's an exclamation point. If you go ahead and click on that exclamation point, being a very inquisitive person, you're going to get this dialog saying, hey, update process version. Pretty much it's just telling you that there are new technologies to process your file that's better, but it's going to cause some changes, and they don't want to enforce it on you right away. They just want you to decide to use it or not. In this case, I want us to use it, so we're going to go ahead and click on it and just make sure we update our process version. For Enhancement Theory 1, what you can easily do is say update all photos or all film strip photos, so it will upgrade all the images to process version 2012. If you just want to do it one at a time, you can also click on update as well. In this case, I'm going to click on update all film strip photos, and now if you notice the exclamation point is gone. If I go to another image, there's also no exclamation point as well, so it's just something to pay attention to right here. Okay. Let's look at this image further. Again, we talked about white balance a moment ago. We're not going to do anything in white balance here. I'm okay with it. But what I'm going to do, though, is enhance our image. So the first thing, the way how I've taught you guys before, is that I'm still going to go in and just bump up the contrast. In this case, I'm going to do it up to 50. Notice, though, that when I bump up the contrast, this is the before and after. The before and after. Notice how we quickly optimize the tone and the colors in our images. Not so much the colors, but the tone, creating more punch, making our images look better. Hence the reason why I like to use this. Okay, let's look at some of the other sliders here. So we have a few other sliders, and I'm going to collapse this quickly here and just kind of go over things. So we have a few other sliders. We have the exposure slider. All right. A few things that the exposure slider does. The exposure slider in Lightroom 4, what it really does is it kind of changed more so the midtones in our images. You can kind of see here I can really darken our images by a whole lot, and I can also overexpose our images by a whole lot as well. So there's a lot of gamut control we can do to our images. This is used as a tool to kind of enhance if the image is too dark or too light or something. It's not necessarily a tool to use when you really overexpose a file and you think you can always pull it back, because if you didn't capture the information on your sensor, then it's not really there to start with. Okay. Again, to reset anything, just double click on the name and just to reset it. Let's say I want to adjust the exposure here by a little nudge like that. Okay, let's move on to our next slider. And the next slider is contrast. We already work on that. We're good. Let's kind of look at the highlight, shadow, white, and black. So for these sliders here, what I'm going to do is just go over them one by one and reset them. But just to kind of give us an idea what it does. So the highlights. Notice the sky here doesn't have a lot of detail. With the highlights, I can pull this back down all the way. This is like our highlight recovery now. So when I pull this to the minus side, it's going to bring back more detail. It's going to recover more of the highlights. Or technically, if you think about like the minus sign thing, it's going to bring the highlights down so that you get more detail. If I bring this up, it's going to force a highlight to go up. And again, I'm losing a lot of detail in the sky there. To reset, double click on highlight. Shadow works in the same fashion. Now, if I actually pull the shadow to the plus side, it's going to work similarly to a fill light. Notice how the area down here are now getting lighter as I move this up more and more, as you can kind of see here. If I move the shadow up, that means I'm bumping the brightness in the shadow area. And if I'm pulling it down to the minus side, that means I'm darkening the shadows, the shadow area. As you can kind of see here, I can really darken that by a whole lot as well. Okay, so that's the shadow slider. The white slider works a little differently. The white slider has to do with this. The white works on the very, very far edge of the histogram right here. And what that really does is that it sets the white point for our images. So if I'm going to do this, I'm going to pull this up here. And notice though how when we move the white point, we barely move the histogram, not so much. We move so much the ending of a histogram as we see right here. And when we do that, we're going to notice that our image becomes a little bit contrastier. But on the same token, if I actually move the white point back, notice how I gain a little bit more color and a little bit more detail in the sky. Okay, so that's just the way how the white works. And again, with the black, I can set the black point by really changing and making this really dark, really black, or really just making it flat and dull like so. Alright, so now that we know kind of how the basic slider in this thing works, let's kind of take a look at how we do something. I'm going to just mess this up really quickly here and show you one more thing. Let's say I just really mess this image up badly. I want to start over. The best way for me to start over is to reset everything. But if I don't want to click on every single name, I can just come here right in the middle and just double click there, and it will reset everything back to default value, as you can kind of see there. Some of you might wonder what auto does. Auto does an auto tuning your image. It tries to make it look better in a way. It does somewhat, but it still has a fairly flat image. I wouldn't use auto for the life of me, but that's just a suggestion right there. Okay, so the best way to adjust the image using the basic panel, what I found out is just set the tones right using the exposure first. And usually when you do that, you're going to lose a lot of detail, like especially in the lighter area in the sky. So I usually pull the highlights, up to where I need to get all the detail I want. And on the shadow side, it's always the juxtaposition of pulling things back and forth. So I'm going to fill in the shadow area a little bit. And when I'm adjusting this image, I notice my image looks really flat, and that's because I didn't add the contrast. So I'm going to go ahead and add the contrast to about 50. Looking better already. Okay, let's set the white point a little bit. Let's see if I pull it up. I like it, but I'm losing a lot of detail in the sky. So I'm going to pull the white point back a little bit, gain a little bit more detail there. And again, you can flatten your blacks here, which I probably wouldn't do for this image. I would just pull this image down like this and just darken the black just like so and gain the full tone. Let's brighten this image up by just a touch. Perfect, just like that. Okay, a few more sliders I want to share with us here. One of the sliders is actually the clarity. So if I notice in these really fine details in the building here, if I pull the clarity up, it acts like a localized contrast. So it just makes it very contrasty in these little areas, in these refined areas right there. You can kind of see. It doesn't actually halo your image, but it just makes your image has the appearance of sharpness. Notice though that this is not sharpening. And also if I pull the clarity down, you can kind of see that it goes a little bit fuzzy and fuzzy and fuzzier, as you can kind of see there. So you're losing a lot of details because it's lowering the contrast around the edges of these little details right here. So I'm going to reset that as well. Two more things I want to go over in here is the vibrancy. If I pull out the vibrancy all the way, notice how the grass and the sky just goes blue, just like so. So pretty much if I pull the vibrancy up all the way, it's going to saturate more of the colors as less saturated. And for example, like these gray bricks buildings and everything, they're already fairly saturated, so it's not going to do as much to it. If I pull the vibrancy down, notice how it still leaves the green in there because there is still some color left in here. Again, it just desaturate most of the colors that are already desaturated, and or make it less vibrant or so. Reset that quickly. I'm going to show you the difference here between what we have in normal mode, vibrancy and saturation. So we're going to go over that just right now, just to kind of show you the difference. Okay. Perfect. So in this case, we have a normal image as we see right here. I'm going to pull up vibrancy to 100 on one of them. And notice how we get like the somewhat saturated sky, saturated grass. Not too bad. But if I actually go over to saturation here, another image here, and pull saturation up, notice though that it kind of brightens up our image differently. See how the bricks just really got pulled up the sky? That should have been more punchier, more blue, didn't get it quite as much. So you can kind of see this is with vibrancy at 100. It works more in the sky, less so in the building. And the saturation 100, which saturate more the building and less of the sky, which doesn't look quite as well. And just to kind of wrap up on the saturation here, if I pull up the saturation down here all the way, notice how I pull out all the colors. And again, in vibrancy, if I pull this up down all the way, only desaturate some of the colors, or took away some of the colors. The green is still there, and there's still some color left in the image. Okay, so this is the ET01 under the basic panel. Watch the next episode as well under ET01 under tonal curve.